Are we all in Silicon Valley in the West Coast? Then good afternoon. I'll just, let's see, I'll share my slides here. So let me first start by thanking, okay, Neha, we had a conversation a while ago now, and she pinged me and she asked me if I was going to do this talk. So thank you very much for inviting me. And when she asked me, I was thinking, what should I talk about? You know, there are lots of things you can talk about product. And so one of the things I notice in product, the backgrounds, people who come to product are usually from business, from primarily computer science or some kind of engineering or design. And there are times subject matter experts in certain verticals that might become product managers. So I have a very non-traditional background in that I'm a physicist, right? And I'm none of these, I don't fall in any of these buckets really. And I also realize as I look more at products, having been doing it for so many years, that I would love to see more diversity in products. So that, you know, so I thought by sharing my background, you know, and what has helped me, maybe it'll encourage people from other areas of life to venture into products, you know, or maybe if you're already in products, then, you know, kind of see how to use those skill sets to help you develop your product, you know, savviness. So let me start with, my oops, hold on a second. There we go. Oh, here we go. So I have a very unconventional start of life. You know, my life started with a crash, believe me, not with a bang, but with a crash. When I was 2.5 years old, I met with a terrible accident that literally crushed my right leg. It was an automobile and a truck. And then, of course, there were surgeries and therapies and physical therapies. But one thing that was clear, you know, I was not going to be a ballerina or an athlete. You know, neither of those were going to happen. And at that time, of course, you know, I was too young. I didn't realize, but I did not know. But I was very comfortable in who I was. And I acknowledged and accepted and found ways to be, you know, different in a good way. You know, there were choices. So that's how my life begins. So it starts off not very conventional, you know, and then fast forward to the second grade, you know, and okay, this thing, why is this not working? Okay. So we were studying science in the second grade, and we were studying, you know, lives of scientists. And then I read about Sir Isaac Newton. And believe me, when I read that and I read the story of how he discovered gravity, I was absolutely fascinated. And even as a child, I was running around thinking, oh my God, I need to go and discover something people have never seen before, done before, some fundamental truth about the universe, right? Unfortunately, I don't think I did anything that great, but that's okay. But Newton was a huge influencer for me. And at the same time, my mother decided that I needed to take music lessons. And so she sent me to a class to learn Indian classical music, which again is, you know, it's music, but it's quite different, you know, from Western music, Western classical music. And therefore, the two of my biggest influences kind of started around the same time. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Indian classical music. And okay, so, you know, Indian classical music is expressed in something we call ragas. So ragas are, when you think of it, they have a defined melodic framework. So there's a scale, there are notes, and you traverse the notes in a particular manner, in a particular way. And the end result is you create a mood. You create happy moods. There are various shades of happiness. You create sadness, various shades of sadness. It could be, you know, it could be about the weather, the seasons. It could be spring, winter, autumn. You know, these are all different moods that you kind of create with these ragas, right? And the interesting thing about the ragas are there are interesting interplays that I wanted to point out. So when you perform, when you sing a raga, I'm a vocalist, so I sing. And when you sing, perform a raga, you have the structure, you have the framework, and you have the freedom to do what you want within that framework. So there are compositions taught to you, but unlike Western classical music, you don't just stick to that composition. You can improvise. In fact, you're asked to improvise. That's the whole power of what you learn. That's the learning, right? How well can you improvise? What can you create within the framework? And there is another important interaction you have is with the rhythm. So whenever you're performing, you have the music, the musician is interacting with there's a rhythm. So there's a cycle of melody and a cycle of rhythm. And there are predefined points where they meet. So I have a picture here, that shows, you see, this is called the tabla that's usually plays, the rhythm player plays it. And here's something called the tanpura, which is, it's a drone that kind of keeps the pitch. And if you're a musician, you kind of tune your voice to that. If you're an instrumentalist, you tune your instrument to that. And this is something called a harmonium, which is an accompanist, this is to beautify the performance more. But the interesting interplays between the rhythm player and the musician who's performing, they go off in their own cycles, but they always have to come back and meet. So there's always this, constraints and freedom. Freedom of creation and yet within constraints, right? And also, like most music, I guess, Indian classical music is also very performance-based. You're performing. You could be performing to a small group, to a very large audience, or even for yourself, but it's performance-based. The end result is you're performing a rag, with an accompanist. So that's just for you to understand the framework of Indian classical music. I'll shift to physics. And physics, as we know, most people know what is physics, but I'll just kind of go, really, it's the theory to understand the universe, right? The vast universe, and you kind of understand the tiny constituents, what makes the vast universe? What does it consist of, right? And, what does matter consist of? That is physics, right? And, and these matter and how they interact with each other. And for me, for everyone, the expression, the language in which you express language and the language of physics is mathematics. So you have mathematical equations, that allow you, to describe the physics, the different physical phenomena. And the reason why I say this, why this is kind of the similarities with product. So you take it, the mathematical equations, you take it, you solve it. And essentially what you have to do, whatever your theory is, it has to ultimately relate to something that's out there, something that's concrete. So you have your hypothesis, then you subject it, you write your equations, you find your solutions, but those solutions need to actually be validated by experiments. And only then it becomes a theory. Only then is it valid. Otherwise, it's a nice concoction, nice mathematics, nice brain exercise, but not physics, right? So just wanted to point that out. And in very interesting ways, both music and physics, I think gave me the initial, the mindset and the skill set for doing product, and I'll, in the next slide, I kind of tell you why. So I'll start with the music, and as a performer, because my first encounter as a performance artist, and one thing I forgot to mention, that in Indian classical music, unlike Western classical music, when you're interacting, you interact very closely with the audience. There is not a big separation. They're interacting with you. They're actually giving you feedback while they listen to your music. So it's a very dynamic interaction, and literally the audience, the customer, the audience is the center of it all. So you're performing for the audience, right? So one of the early things I learned as a performer, that you perform for somebody, it is in the service of somebody, and whatever you are performing, your raga, you have to be extremely agile. You have to speed it up if you think people are getting bored, and you have to kind of slow it down if you think that's not the speed at which they want my performance, right? Or if you're prepared to sing a particular raga, maybe the mood of the audience is different. So as I said, the ragas convey a mood, the mood is different, and you want to look at the audience, understand them, and perhaps perform a different raga. So that's something, a very, very important lesson I learned from Indian classical music. The other thing, of course, as you practice as a musician, the ragas, as I mentioned, the ragas are, there are no fixed compositions per se. You are the creator. But, when you're a 6-year-old, you learn a raga. You perform the same raga when you're 40 years old, you're 50 years old. It's not the same thing. It's different. So literally the way you develop, you start with a simple structure. And then you start adding to it, right? You improvise. And therefore, that's somewhere, you learn the concept of iterative development, that this is the basic concept. Now you can add to it. Now you can make it even better, right? And that's how you progress, right? And of course, there's rigor and discipline as in any music, and there is collaboration with your accompanist. And I've done a lot of, I've organized a lot of concerts. So I think I picked up some organizational skills from it. Now, physics, on the other hand, gave me, the biggest thing it gave me is perspective, that you see gravity huge, giant, and then there are, electromagnetic forces, tiny quarks and electrons, right? Tiny particles, right? And you use different tools to investigate the two different layers. And so it gave me perspective. When you look at something, you figure out what is the right tool for this. So that's one thing. Of course, as a scientist, you're always extracting the underlying principles. You have an open mind, you're curious. But importantly, it taught me how to design models for experiments. That's a very, very important part. And interpret and analyze data. Literally, I think all physicists are data scientists, right? It's kind of a fundamental part of who they are. And interestingly, in a grad school, I picked up a couple other skills. One was entrepreneurship. I know it sounds funny, but something, you start an investigation. You say, okay, I'm going to work on this problem and I'm going to get my PhD. But something, when you start, you don't know what the end results are going to be. So many times, you have to pivot so many times. You go in one direction and you realize, this just is not going to work. I have to figure out another way to do it, right? So it teaches you to be an entrepreneur in that sense. Collaboration is, of course, there. You work with other theoretical physicists, with experimentalists. But one important thing it taught me in grad school was, which problem should I be solving? There are thousands of problems you can solve. And the reason for that is, and I think it's very relevant to product, is choosing the right problem to solve. What is the important problem? Because you're competing for grants. There's the NSF grant, there is DOE grants. If you're going to work on some insignificant problem or a problem that's not big enough, you're not going to get it, right? So, and then you have to teach a course or something while you're doing your PhD. You don't want to do that. So I felt that very fundamentally, both music and physics taught me the basic elements of what I needed for my journey into product, So then, from here I go, I get my PhD in physics, and my landing in Silicon Valley is sheer accident. I was in Cleveland, Ohio, and I come from there to Silicon Valley. Is of the cheesy graphics from the show for Silicon Valley, which is kind of not quite true, but sort of. But guess what? I have a chance conversation with a friend, which leads to an interview, and then I get a job offer. They don't hire me as a physicist. They hired me because I could code, because I could write code. Coding was just a tool that I had. I could write code in C, and I could answer all their questions, and that's why I got hired. So although I did start off with, I have an unconventional background, which I do, I did start off professionally as a software engineer. That is my entry into the world of technology, right? And then I just mention an incident, in the very first company when I came in, when I was very much more of a physicist. I'm still a physicist, but I was a lowly engineer, as I said, very junior, didn't know anything. I was just doing what I was being asked to do. But of course, I understood the product, tried understanding it. We had a big customer, who ran into an issue. And of course, they didn't bring that issue to me, but I heard conversation in the office. It was a startup. The engineers were debugging the code. I think there were people in the test organization who were rerunning all their automated tests, and they were not finding, what was wrong. So I did go to the support person who was actually the main liaison with that company and asked them, can you tell me how's the customer using the product? And he was very generous. He explained, he drew me a picture and helped me understand what they're doing with the product. And it then came to me, I was thinking like a physicist. So I said, I came and I made a very crude tool. I wrote a little crude tool, and then I essentially simulated the environment in which, they probably were using the product. And lo and behold, I was able to reproduce the problem. And these folks who were working on, on debugging and running their automated tests were brilliant, brilliant software engineers. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, they were very, very, very smart, very good. But they were looking at the problem in a different way. And I was very nervous initially, but then I ran my silly tests several times, and then I said, I think I am able to produce it. And so I went to one of the lead engineers and said, hey, you know what, this is it. And he was initially skeptical, but when he saw it, he said, oh, damn, you're right. This is what it is. And they were actually able to go solve the problem and, fix the issue. But thereon, begins my journey. I kind of always kept my lenses of physics, and I kind of continued, so I went on to become a lead engineer. I'm not going to bore you with the details until I landed in Netscape. Now, Netscape, at that point, Netscape was one of the best product companies you could think of. They had some of the best product people. Marty Kagan was there. At that point, Ben Horowitz there. He left soon after I joined, but it was a fantastic, fantastic place. They had just gotten acquired by AOL. I came in through another acquisition, but we were all in the same floor working with some of the best minds in product. And there, although I was in engineering and I'd become an engineering manager for a small product, I inherited a product that was given to me as a reward that did not have a PM. And I ended up becoming the PM, and it was like, okay, if someone has to be the PM, I'll be the PM, I guess. And that started my product journey, really. And then I worked in different roles. And the reason I put this thing down here, I worked as a chief product officer, head of engineering and product, but in different flavors. So as a CTO, I had product reporting into me. As VP of technology, I had everything, including product. Then I've several times worked as VP of engineering and product, together. And then as a CPO at not this my last role at Eros, I had all of, I had the entire product team, engineering, product, data science, customer service, everything reported into me. And, very recently with Pluto TV, Viacom, CBS, it was pure product and product management and user experience and design. So the role of a CPO, it comes in several flavors, I think, and one needs to figure out, which CPO you are. And I have an opinion. My opinion is in a large enough company, every function should have its own, own status, should have equal footing. But if someone has to report into something, I think engineering reporting into product makes much more sense than the other way around. And that's from experience. I've done both, and I can say that works better. That's more holistic if it has to work that way. And so next, I thought, maybe I'll just kind of share, what I think, are the main things of a chief product officer. What does a chief product officer do? So the chief product officer role primarily is a leadership role. And it is a C-suite leadership role that needs a seat at the table. So if you're not reporting into the CEO, and if you're not with the other C-level execs, you're really not a chief product officer. It's very, very important to make sure that happens, because then, your product suffers, honestly, from not getting the right insight and love that it needs to get. The chief product as a leader, you have to be an influencer and an evangelist. So influencer, we all know, but you're like the chief influencer. Your product is gluing all the other functions in the company, right? to a certain extent. And so you need to be that person who helps become that glue, and who helps, and you have to evangelize both your team and your product, to everyone, not just your customers, even internally. And then you have to be a really good coach to your team. I think that's the responsibility of a chief product officer, right? So you have to be a coach. You have to coach your team to do the best. Strategy, the product vision, the company might have a vision, but you have to make sure to formulate clear product vision in the strategy. You have to work with your team, make sure that happens. You need to account for the business, be accountable for the business outcome. Because at the end of the day, if your product is not making money for the company or is not doing what the company intended it to do, you have to come back and rethink. So you have a very big role there. And although you're not in marketing, I think you need to influence, how your product is impacting the market. You have some role to play there. So I think these are very, very important roles for the CPO. A lot of things. There's certain knowledge you have to have. I think you have to have deep understanding of the market forces, and of course the users. Because market forces, I say, it's not just your competition, because crazy things can happen, like COVID-19. What happens in such a case? But your product might not even live. Is there a way for you to then morph the product into something else? You need to think about these things. Of course, you need very deep customer insights and understanding of the user experience, because that's very fundamental to the product. And you need to have solid understanding of technology and business. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to be a software engineer. You don't have to have an MBA, but I think you need to have a very solid understanding of both, in order to be the chief product officer. And then finally, everything lies in execution. Is how do you execute? If you can't execute on your product, everything is moot, right? Makes no sense. So for me, I think the most important part here is designing the right organization. And by that, I mean, when I say designing the right organization, it's not just, what the function of the organization is going to be. Do you have everything that the product team needs to operate independently? I feel that's important, right? For you to have that layer within the team. But also designing the organization in a way, that's where diversity plays a big role, in my opinion. Where you get, big picture thinkers, people who are really detailed oriented, people who are like fanatical about data, and then people who are really, they get crazy about customer research, right? You need all those people. Your team has to be designed, very well. And then lastly, you just need to empower your teams, to deliver the product that they should. That's where that empowering them, that's a very important part of your job. So I felt, these I felt were the 4 quadrant in which you need proficiency to be a chief product officer. And then let me talk a little bit about, diversity, which I'm very passionate about, because of all the functions in an organization, I think product needs diversity the most. Because imagine how products get created. It kind of starts with some idea. It starts with a concept, right? And the more different ways of thinking you can incorporate into that, the better outcomes, I feel, right? So when we talk of diversity, people usually think of gender and race. And we know that, there are these are data, some facts that with racial and ethnic diversity, companies with higher racial and ethnic diversity, they have 35% better chance of getting better financial results than other people in their vertical. This is data that shows you that. A woman on board, companies who have at least a woman on the board outperform peer organizations by 26%, right? If you have more than 20% in upper management, there is 10% more revenue coming from new products and services. So this mixture is really helping. And I would love to see beyond gender and race, how can we diversify the product teams, diversity of experiences, right? Because your customer is not you, right? Your customer comes in all ages, all shapes, all kinds of nationality, all kinds of different backgrounds, from different industries maybe. And so the more, a better mix you have, more people who can bring in different ideas, different solutions, different ways of looking at the problem, you end up creating a much better customer experience, right? And it encourages out of the box thinking. And honestly, I think they're doing more studies. They've seen, diverse teams actually, you get much higher revenue and profit when you have a diverse team. It kind of logically makes a lot of sense to me, because you have new ideas, new ways of thinking, better output, right? Better output. So diverse problem solvers will always outperform homogeneous groups. Now, the problem, and I'm guilty of this, the problem we have more so in Silicon Valley, we quickly want to form a team. People you've worked with before, people who went to the same school, you grab them in. You're getting more and more people like yourself. So one of the things I have started doing now consciously, so trying to hire people, no one is good at everything. You have your strengths and your weaknesses, certain things I'm not good at. I try to get other leaders within the product organization who actually complement my weaknesses, who kind of, I love maybe big picture, larger thinking, but maybe I do need another leader who's extremely detailed oriented, who will look at the tiny little thing that I might have forgotten. You need that person in the team. Figure who that is, figure out what you are good at, what you're not so good at, and get that into the mixture. But I think I want to end with, above all, I want to say I have always, I've lived in product for a long time. I still am I've owned my difference. I still look at the world through my lens of music and my lens of physics. I look at any problem that way, right? And I've learned a lot of things, and I'm so happy and ecstatic about it, but that's my core. I have not tried to change. Many people, I said, I refuse to think in other, because that's not me. That won't bring the best, that won't bring what is me, what is my strength. Let me lead with that, and I make up, I hire people, I collaborate with people who kind of can do things I cannot do, right? So I want to leave everyone with embrace differentiation. You are different, be proud of it, embrace that. Don't try to fit in for the sake of fitting in, right? Bring your strengths to the table. Delegate your weakness, because none of us are perfect. So figure out how you can delegate it, how you can complement it. And third is important, as I said before, there are certain skills, core skills you need in order to do the product job, or any job for that matter. You have to acquire the skill. So you might not be a software engineer, but you need to have a good understanding of technology and architecture. You might not have an MBA, but you need to have a very good understanding of business, and that's it. And embrace your differentiation. That's what I want to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Shampa. That was very, very inspiring. And I come from a non-traditional background too, so I can relate to your story really, really well. Can you share an example of where your approach from experience in music and experience in physics actually affected the product that you were building?
But I mean, directly, it's little, I'll tell you, one of the things, I've been working in streaming products for a while, right? So I'll tell you, because music has had a big impact there, right? Music has a big impact there because, I still call my users audience, my audience. And many a times, in streaming, it made sense. I'm doing it for the audience, right? Putting them at the center. I know people talk about it, but I truly believe it. I'm honestly, in my mind, when I'm creating the product, when I've finished the product, I always see, I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing someone else looking at it, right? And I try to put myself there. I try to listen to them. That's why I'm very, I use all possible tools. I talk to customers. I listen to their feedback. And I make sure the way the product gets built, that we can very quickly make changes based on the feedback that the customer is giving you. So that truly comes from my music, because it's putting the customer first, my audience. I'm serving my audience. That's always will it make them happy? Will honestly, and I always look for ways, how can I make this special for them? What is it I can do that'll delight them, really? So that's where, and especially in streaming products, that has been the case, where I've always been thinking about and talking to them, figuring out what is the biggest impact that's going to get on them. Physics has worked in many ways because I'm very analytical. I mean, like my last company, people were doing a lot of things based on gut reaction, again, a lot of tools didn't exist, but even before many of the tools existed, I was very, very gung-ho on data. And I would say, let's kind of figure out, why this is so. And I'll tell you, data, I mean it in a data and also understanding, analyzing. I think analyzing a problem. I'll give you an example. We launched a product, it was a streaming product in a particular region. And we knew the behavior of that particular cohort of users, right? So my audience, I knew how to watch. And typically, if you give them a free product, they're not going to pay for it. So we wanted to get our paid subscriptions up. It was a freemium product. And so we decided initially that let's give them a free trial. And we thought 30-day free trial might be too long because they might just end up watching everything they want to watch and not buy the subscription, right? So let's make it a 2-week, instead. And the interesting part is after like 2 or 3 months of this going on, the numbers really didn't do well. And so we went back into it and I asked my team, what's going on? Are these people not liking what they're watching? Are we having technical issues? Or have they already really watched everything they wanted to watch and they're leaving us after doing that? The interesting part, they found that very large, like probably 60% of the people who they had put in their credit card, they subscribed to the trial, they never came back. And I was truly worried. I was worried, oh my God, there is something really bad with the product that they cannot come back. Perhaps they can't log in, right? Whatever, right? So we were trying to look at the data in all possible ways. And then I said, okay, you know what, stop. Let's change our tool. This is the tool of investigation. Let's reach out. We have their information. Let's reach out to the customers. And what we found is something very simple. They said, it was on a weekend that we subscribe to this product, and then we subscribe, and then we just had 1 weekend to try. I mean, that's when we sit down and we stream these movies, right? We had 1 weekend, and that just was not enough. And we said, so many let it go, so many subscriptions. And we would have never found out had we just tried looking at the data and slicing and dicing it further. So it was for me to kind of very quickly realize that this is not working. Let's go another way, another prong, and see it. So I feel that's, those 2 examples where I feel.
That's very, very valuable. It's like, yes, we often run into figuring out there is a blind spot, but you don't know where. And changing the way you look at the problem, like where your physicist hat, and that can be super helpful. We've got a couple questions. One from David. You mentioned it seemed more holistic to have engineering report into product. Can you elaborate as to why?
Sure. I mean, as I said in the beginning, the right approach would be engineering has its own silo, product has its own silo, right? I mean, they should be independent, they should be working together, right? The reason is because engineering is building the product. It's not the other way around. So engineering reporting into product reporting into engineering does not work. That's what I was trying to say. If someone has to report into somebody, then it makes a little more sense for engineering reporting into product and not the other way around. Because, product is not, because engineering will be building the product. And so therefore product understanding and owning that makes a little more sense.
Got it. Thank you. We have another question. So do you see similarities between the iterative development process of Scrum and the cyclical time cycles of Ragas?
That's interesting. Scrum, I don't know. Yeah, well, not exactly. I mean, the concepts are so iterative, what I see, in some sense it is. I don't know whether it's Scrum, but in agile development, a cyclical deployment, I see now Scrum is essentially, it's like a, I don't know, if 2 week is just a process of doing work. But the concept, I think there is some concept there where I see more a similarity with MVP and how you, so essentially you have a base like this, like I said, 6-year-old learns the raga. So this is something you launch to market and you see, you get the feedback from your audience, and then you kind of build on top of that. That's where I see more similarity.
Got it. Super helpful. Yeah, lots of synergies between the fundamentals of ragas and how we operate as PMs. Yeah, I'd love to pick your brain on the concept of embracing differentiation and diversity in product teams. How do we calibrate that with, you want to embrace that, you want to not fit in for the sake of fitting in, at the same time you want to make sure you get buy-in. And in order to do that, there's some level of assimilation that is crucial. So I'd love, from your experience, can you share ways of when to hold strong and when to let go in order to get that stakeholder support that you need to drive decisions?
That's a great question, actually. And something, when I was doing this, when I was preparing the slides, I was thinking, about it, right? You don't sit and think about it all the time. It's a very good point. So one thing is important. It is your thinking hat. Your differentiation is how you think, what you bring. It could be something else, right? Bring to the table. Now, there is a lingo. There's a language for everything, right? So if I'm working on digital products, right, and I come back with crazy terminology nobody understands, right, then that's a problem, right? So, but I'll tell you, in one of my early startups, where I worked, where I learned a lot, especially about architecture and technology. I was working there, and we had a very, very distributed backend system. And I did not know how the pieces talk to each other. And it was important for me to understand. I did not know the word. There was a word called architecture diagram. So I did go to, I went around trying to find people, as you probably know very well, Neha, right? You're trying to put things in, pieces of the puzzle together. And so I did finally go, I went to the VP of engineering and I said, what I really need? I need a map. I need a map of everything. And he says, you need a map of what? The office? I said, no. I need a map of everything, a map of how everything works. So it was very funny. One of the senior architects today was passing, he heard us and he started laughing. And he says, we should really do it. We haven't done it. She's talking about our architecture diagram. So, so I did not know the terminology. And it is on you to educate yourself, because as you're saying, in order to get buy-in, in order to speak the language, you have to learn the terminology. You have to learn. That's what I'm saying. It's important to understand the technology, learn the technology, understand the business, learn the business. I cannot use crazy terminology and crazy concepts that's completely alien to everybody. But what you can do is take your hat, because you are thinking differently. And by thinking differently, you're bringing something else into the conversation. You map it to the known lingo and then present it to others, because then you have a new train of thought, and that way you get your stakeholders understand it. And I'm not saying be different for the sake of being different. I'm just saying you have something different to offer, something that you think will add to it. Then speak it in a language everyone will understand.
Yeah, very, very helpful. Like adapting to the local
yes,
culture, right? Wherever you are is crucial.
It's crucial. You adapt to it, but you can keep your thoughts and you take that and re-express it, but don't let that thought of how you were thinking go away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would you recommend any favorite frameworks that you have used in your career to our audience today?
I don't know, I'm just, as I say, I'm laughing a little bit because I'm one of the people, people come with like, especially, prioritizing, feature prioritization, I don't know, there are 9,000, not 9,000, but there are so many frameworks, right? And each like, I don't know, nothing is perfect, right? And depends. I usually try to go back to basic principles, right? Because I see so much like this, oh, if you did this feature, this is the, whatever the value, perceived value this is going to the business, and the makeup. And now, I mean, I'm not criticizing. They have, what's it called? Not Scrum. They have a new Safe, Agile, whatever. They have their own whatever terminology, something, and they have this perceived that we have delivered so much value. I said, you've delivered nothing. The product barely launched. We don't know how it's going to do. You don't know unless people start buying, people start paying money, you see engagement, you don't know. The value is only after you watch the product, right? So after you've launched it. So I personally, people often get into these things and kind of spend too much time. I go with very fundamental principles. And I always guide the teams to do that, right? That whatever method you're using to prioritize, let's say usually that happens, prioritization is very important. I go by what is if you were the customer, what is the most important thing for you? What is the most important impact? Which of these features would have on the customer? And then you look at it, and would it have an equally or a fairly large impact on the business? Is there a way we can monetize this, right? And I like to look at prioritization in that manner versus, looking at different frameworks, And I'm sure I use frameworks, I never remember them. I just look at it and I say, okay, this makes sense now, let's do this, right? So, but that's how I approach it. I start with the fundamental definition of product is it's a solution to a problem. And solution to a problem that actually the customers will find useful. Customers can actually use, this easy for them to use, right? Your engineering team can build it, and it's going to not cost you some gigantic amount of money to build it. And the business, it's feasible for the business. The business can actually make money out of it, right? Otherwise, it ends up being a hobby, right? If you're going to create products that people love it, but I make great lemonade, but really I can't make that much money, or it won't scale, whatever it is, right? So that's a fundamental principle. I love that definition. I keep reminding people of that because at the end of the day, it always boils down to that. If you look at it in the lens, will it satisfy my customer? You have to find out what access and what different access that will satisfy, and will it make money for the business? And if you see something that seems a really good solution for the customers, you have not quite figured out the business, figure out the business, sit down, think through it, and see how you can monetize it. What are the ways this can be, people will pay for this.
Very helpful, thank you. Others, any other shout outs or questions? We've got a few minutes left. I want to make sure we leave the time for anything that our attendees want to share.
I've got a quick question if nobody else does at the moment. Shampa, I really enjoyed the talk. I really enjoyed this discussion of your background in music and physics and how that kind of led you to where you went. The discussion of differentiation was really great as well. My question is actually really simple, but I'm curious, do you still perform music?
I kind of do. I used to do much more of it. I do, in fact, my music took different forms because after I came to this country, as a grad student, I had a band that was not exactly doing Indian classical music, but more Bollywood film songs because that's people like to listen to it. But when I came to the Bay Area, and that's been a while, there are more Indian classical musicians. So I've done some performances. I did some shows. I did for semi-classical music at the Little Fox Theater, typically to raise money for, some nonprofits.
That sounds great.
Yeah, do let us know next time you're performing. We'd love to extend the invite to our community. Super. Anyone else wants to share a project or is hiring or is looking for a job? This is a great forum to do so. Feel free to put it on the chat or ping on Q&A, and I'll definitely make sure to give you airtime. No. Okay. So Shampa, thank you so much. What is the best way if people want to reach out to you?
My email, Shampa, it's very easy, SHAMPA, Shampa@gmail.com.
Oh, brilliant. Awesome.
Yeah, I should have left that in the last slide, but Shampa@gmail.com. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure like LinkedIn or email.
There you go, LinkedIn. Yeah, you can always find me there. Yeah.
And David just pinged. He is looking for a product manager and a product owner at NetHealth. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your email address. Excellent. And thank you once again, Shampa. This was very, very helpful, very inspirational, and we really appreciate you volunteering your time. You're a busy CPO, so this means a lot to us and our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thanks very much. Okay, bye. Goodbye.
All right, it's a wrap. Yes, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. And again, this webinar was recorded, so you can find the recording later to come back to it if you wish on productsthatcount.com.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, good night, everyone.